Good Sunday morning to you. It's good to have you back. And last week we did a little bit of experimentation with resin, UV resin to be specific. This week we're going to try a different product in the casting products family, and this is what I'm going to call polymer compounds, because they're being called a bunch of different names, and I think it's just adding to the confusion. So let's dive into what we need for this project. Resincrete and Magic Pour are the two out of 5 or 6 that are available to do this kind of casting project. Mixing bowl, a spatula or whisk or a stirring stick. You need some molds, but they do not necessarily have to be clear molds. You'll see me using clear molds because that's what I have. Some water and some colorants, and we will talk about colorants in the next slide. Here's what we don't need. No sleeves in my case to protect my arms, or long sleeve shirt in your case. No gloves for most of this. You might want to do a little test patch on the inside of your arm to see if you're allergic to any of the ingredients, but so far nobody has said they are. And no mask, except for possibly when you're measuring and mixing the powder, because it does puff up a little bit and you don't want to breathe that in. We also don't need our UV curing light because this product cures in the open air, and we're going to swap it for a digital scale. Now, this is a kitchen scale. It's common all over Amazon and other websites. A word about these kitchen scales: they will often change the number that's registering as weight, and we're going to be weighing in grams. So at the very end, when you're trying to hit exactly the amount you need, sometimes bumping the table or moving something, or who knows for what reason, the number will change a little bit. Jewelers' scales are much smaller and much more accurate. However, you can't put a big mixing bowl on a jeweler's scale. So there is a fudge factor built into these products of 1 to 5 grams, and you can hit, say, 30.2 grams or even 31 grams and still be within the tolerance. So it's something to think about, but not something to worry too much about. There's only 1 or 2 exceptions to that rule, and the first one is if you're doing experiments where you need exactly the same product with the exact same consistency in order to test the different properties of the products, like how well does it take color, how fragile is it, and that kind of thing. The other exception to that rule is if you are making multiple products. Let's say you have a commission order for 5 sets of coasters, and you want those coasters to be as consistent as possible in the results, both in sturdiness and in how well they take color. You want to do color matching, that kind of thing. Then you would want to be very accurate with your measurements. So those are really the only 2 functional exceptions we're going to be dealing with here today. Now, I'm pretty confident, even though we haven't done any pours yet, in what I just told you, because I watched a 2-parter, about 3 hours worth of experiments, cost breakdowns, availability breakdowns. Not all of these products are available in the United States, as well as strength tests, coloring. Oh gosh, now I've forgotten all the things that she's tested. Nevertheless, Pretty Not Perfect Crafts has done all the work for you. So if you really want to decide what is important to you, how economical this is going to be, I recommend at least watching the first one, but I would watch both of them because I'm just a geek like that, and so is she and her husband. So next thing we need to discuss is colorants and sealers, and we're going to leave sealers until we have a finished product. So for colorants, we're going to try a natural colorant, which in this case is turmeric. We already know turmeric dyes everything. You can look at it in the grocery store and your hands will be yellow. We'll also try alcohol inks, food coloring, whatever is left of the green in that almost empty bottle. That's what we'll use, but we'll use an alcohol ink as a test against the food coloring in green. We're also going to test acrylic paint. That's the red over there. And I can already tell you acrylic paint works very well. And we're also going to test another paint, tempera paints. If you remember back when you were a kid and the teacher had to get you some paint to do a painting project, and it wasn't watercolor paint, it was a different kind of paint. It was powder usually, although it does come in liquid form. She would sometimes mix up the tempera paint in the water right in front of you. And so we're going to try that because nobody else has tried tempera paints. Tempera paints do have a color fastness issue, and we will do a longer term test to see how well tempera paint does. Also, you cannot use liquid fabric dye. Another channel has already done this test for you. Clever Girls Craft has done the tests that we're doing today, many of them, although she did not do tempera paint. And so I'll leave you a link to her channel so you can see what happened in her video to liquid fabric dye in polymer compounds. I forgot which one she used, if it was a Resincrete or Magic Pour or one of the other ones. So here are the mixed ratios for both Resincrete and Magic Pour. Mix ratio for Resincrete is 100 grams of powder to 35 grams of water. And the ratio for Magic Pour is 100 grams of powder to 30 grams of water. Here we go. There's me doing Lookama no gloves. Now, the first thing I have to tell you is that the temperature in this room is 75 degrees, and I believe that made a difference. I did make a cut in the original 16-minute and 20-second video because I had to go get a scoop and measure it and tear it out so I would know how much the scoop weighed. So when I scooped in my powder, I had a rough estimate. It's about 30 grams of powder in this size scoop. Just for your information, it's a extra scoop from a sports drink. Next thing you need to know is that I made a double batch. So 200 grams of powder to 70 grams of water, and that was way too much. I should have done 50 grams at a time because every time I had to stop and clean out the pot and add another colorant, that took up valuable cure time. That product is not lost, even though it's a lump of hardened Resincrete. It is not lost, and we'll talk about that after we're done with all this fooling around. Without making any further cuts, I'm speeding this up because when we get to the pouring part of these little samples, I want you to see in real time how fast this stuff actually cures. Keeping in mind the original clip for this part was 16 minutes 20, and it's 75 degrees in the room. You just saw me lift that mixing pot up in the previous clip and put it back down on the scale, and that was to get the scale to reset itself so that I could get an accurate measurement because I wasn't getting one. Additionally, this stuff is very watery to start with, and I pour out what's about 14 grams, and our food coloring is a massive fail. There just isn't enough to even come out. So we move on to the cheap, or I should say inexpensive alcohol inks, and I put in 3 drops, mixed it up, and it was still pretty watery. So I thought, okay, I have plenty of time, and I pour it, and you can see how watery it really is. All right, back to real time now. And that sped up portion, by the way, was at 3.5 times speed. So now we have regular speed. It pours in just like any other pouring medium we've used, with the exception of epoxy resin, because I haven't tried that. I have too much. So about, I would say, maybe 5 grams too much. So I pour another little sample just to get it out of the pot. So far, so good, right? I already know that my leisurely working time for these videos or paper craft videos or soap videos, it makes these way too long. And so whenever I have the opportunity, I speed things up or I make jump cuts or what have you. But since we're at real time speed and I'm just sort of meandering my way through this is where things get a little sideways. Our next colorant is turmeric. And I start out with a 16th of a teaspoon. No, sorry. Yeah, a 16th of a teaspoon. And I think, well, gosh, that's going to be way too much. It's going to be too dark of a yellow, but, what the heck? I then double it once I start mixing it and find out that I could have doubled it again, making it almost a half teaspoon. It's so rare in things that you dye turmeric with, but let's just keep going. For those of you who had sharp eyes, you'll notice exactly what I noticed previously while I was pouring the Resincrete. It was already starting to thicken, and at that time the consistency was heavy cream. But I still wasn't really concerned about it. I thought everything's going to be okay, and I'm concentrating on trying to figure out whether I need more turmeric or not. You can't really tell. It's a very pale yellow, and as I said before, I decide to add another 32nd of a teaspoon, bringing it up to an eighth of a teaspoon. And I could talk about my cat or my dog to fill some of this commentary while we watch me do that, but I don't have a cat or a dog at this time. Haven't had one for 4 years almost. There is one whose adoption fee is already paid at my local shelter. He's a little cutie, and I was very tempted to go up there on Monday, which would be the day after the last show, and snatch him up. But I know that, at least for the time being, that's not feasible. So now I've decided that I have enough yellow in this cup, and I pour it. And this is again a real-time pour. And I notice again, it's pouring, but it's thick, like I said, and I'm still not really concerned. And I pour what's left into a mold that's too big for it, but it doesn't matter. It'll probably just end up being a color sample with, what I used on it. And then things really get hairy. I cut out a minute, 28 seconds of me cleaning my tools, and oh look, nothing's pouring out. I stick my stirring stick in there, and it is, I don't know, well, you're just going to have to figure out how thick it is right there. And it is well on its way to curing. So, like maybe very cold cream cheese. And I decide that because I'm mixing it, there might be enough time if I add a little bit more water to loosen it up. There might be enough time to get one more pour out. And so that's what I do. I get it just loose enough to stir it, and I pour it, and then I add a 1/4 teaspoon of red acrylic paint. The specific paint I used is Master's Touch from Michaels, and the product number is SA250. It's crimson. It will not be the same price as printed on there because I bought this paint 7 or 8 years ago and have barely used it. The other thing you should know about using acrylic paint is that it attracts and absorbs water in its wet state. So I have my Resincrete to the consistency of cold sour cream now, and adding the acrylic paint makes it thicker. I can't, somewhere between cold sour cream and back to cold cream cheese. And I know that I just need to get it in the mold any way I can, smush it down any way I can, and hope for the best, because at best, the back of this piece will have to be sanded. It's very lumpy and there's not much I can do about it. So I go through all that jazz and end up with a fair amount left over because it's just too thick to get it into the mold. So I clean out my tools again. Now let's look at what the end result was. So food coloring was a fail because we couldn't get it out of the bottle, so we used green alcohol ink instead. It's very smooth on both sides. There's no modeling or robin's egg type speckling like some other people have reported with alcohol inks. And this is the least expensive alcohol ink you could get your hands on. I have no explanation for it. Going on to the turmeric. The back is a little rougher, and that's because it was starting to set up. But it's a nice matte finish on the front, same as the first two. And there you can see where it was starting to set up. And the color is okay. The turmeric I have tons of it, so it's not a problem. This is the crimson acrylic paint, and I just pointed out to you a couple of places where the pigment was not mixed in. They're not bubbles. So far, so good. Here is the overage of the crimson, and the back is terrible, but the front is fine. Acrylic paint, if it's not quite thoroughly mixed in, can give you a beautiful marbling effect, and that red does have some marbling. This is, what happened about 5 seconds after I poured the last little cabochon there. This lump hardened. It is not breakable with my hands, although a good hammer would definitely make short work of that hardened Resincrete. Now, the little pieces, the flat pieces that I'm showing, that one is a lump and you can't break it with your fingers, but those flat pieces are about as thick as an eggshell, and you saw me squeeze my silicone and all of them just fell off the sides of the silicone mold. They can be reused in terrazzo, and that's a subject for a different day. This next segment is me showing you blue tempera paint powder as a colorant, and all I'm doing is mixing it up with water and a little bit of 91% alcohol just to kill any bacteria that might get into the process once I add it to water. I used 5 milliliters or 1 pipette full of water at first. This takes forever, or it seems like it takes forever to mix up. I do end up loosening it up with a little bit more water, but the point being, what I'm doing is making basically a tempera paint pigment liquid, not unlike resin dyes and resin pastes. So call it tempera paste. I did not put any of the product's powder in it because unlike resin dyes, this powder, once water hits it, it activates. And so you don't want any of these Resincrete or polymer compound products in your paste. Hope that makes sense. All right, let's move on. For this little clip, we're going to jump right to the unmolding because I've already shown you mixing, and in this one I used 58 grams of powder to 18 grams of the water and 2 teaspoons of the tempera paint powder. And this first one is very delicate. It's a little, or no, it's the second one. First one is just a bar pendant. It's just a rectangle with a hole in it, and we'll probably put something decorative on that. This next one is a little pair of eyeglasses or sunglasses. It's very delicate, and I think I'm going to end up coating it in UV resin to strengthen it. And these are a pair of wonky looking earrings, kind of a throwback to 70s vibe. Probably will cover those in resin as well to strengthen them, which means this sort of faded denim color that we got with the tempera paint will darken considerably, and maybe at the end of this video I will show you those as a sample piece. These are bracelet links. They're very small and very delicate. I have 2 square and 2 oblong, and what I just showed you is you have to be very careful because there's 4 holes in the corners, 1 in each corner, for jump rings or to make them into links. So you can see better there. And the first one didn't get all the way around the little post in the mold that makes the holes. And so that'll probably be our test piece. That those 2 square ones, I'll put one just out on my desk and somewhere or on the shelf above me and let ambient light, take its toll on it. And the other little square one, I'll put in a light safe bag where no light gets to it. And we'll do a comparison maybe around the holidays or something like that to give it enough time to let sunlight and ambient light have an effect. And the rest of these are just cabochons. I need to do a little trimming. But as with the first go around by the time we got to turmeric and acrylic paste, this was starting to set up, even though it was a much smaller quantity. You'll see these pieces need a little trimming, and they have rough backs, just like the setup in the previous one. Again, 75 degrees in my studio, and this has a very short work time, much shorter than the box says for small jewelry pieces. There I'm showing you, the same result. So bear that in mind. If you're going to do a bunch of, stock cabochons to be decorated later, you need to take in the very short work time. 15 minutes is about your maximum. Other than very short work time on small cabochon jewelry pieces, what else did we learn? Well, as far as colorants go, alcohol inks work, but you need to use a lot of them to get a rich color. Acrylic paint, on the other hand, works great if you want a saturated, rich color. Turmeric works, but you have to use more than you would expect to use because of, I don't know why. I think it's because Resincrete is naturally pigmented white, and so it actually tempers the dyeing effect of turmeric. Nevertheless, it works. Tempera paint powder. We put our 2 teaspoons of tempera paint powder into our Resincrete powder and then mix it up. And doing it that way, we got very little color variation. Like there was no marbling effect to speak of, but it colors very well. And keeping in mind that the room temperature for all these tests was 75 degrees, and we also learned that you cannot use liquid fabric dye at all. It totally inhibits the curing of the Resincrete, so don't do it. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time during this episode to test the magic pour, but we will test it, and we will do much the same tests. Little small jewelry pieces. We'll see if the work time is similar. We'll see if it takes dyes in a similar way and all that jazz next week. However, next week we will be pouring a decorative piece. I'm kind of tired of pouring little pieces that are just tests, and I suspect you would like to see something other than little cabochon test pieces. So next week we'll do that. Thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it. Your comments, questions, and concerns are always welcome in the comment section, and your likes and shares are welcome as well. God bless you, and I'll see you real soon.